I want to add to what you just said about like believing that you can do the actual thing. Maybe you don't believe you can do the actual thing. But I do think what's required is you have some level of belief in yourself, in I don't know what I might call the universe, in something that will drive you forward to do scary stuff that you don't believe you can do, or that you have doubt. I should not say that you don't believe you can do, because I think it's true that we don't do what we don't believe we can do. Absolutely, that our behavior follows our beliefs. And if you believe you absolutely are going to fail, this is kind of a fuzzy space, right? I don't think it's all or nothing. Believe in yourself, don't believe in yourself. I think it's be open to the possibility that you are powerful enough to make this happen.
Driven, competitive, thriving in hustle culture, navigating through epic highs and crushing lows. Who do you guys think I'm talking about? Well, surprise, it's not musicians, even though that totally does sound like us, doesn't it? Today, we're talking to an expert in a particular field who's going to help us with time management, productivity, and maybe even becoming a little less stressed while we tackle all that stuff we want to get done. So what type of industry am I hinting at that has so much in common with musicians? Find out right now when we talk to my guest, Cami McLaren, coming right up on the Honesty Pill podcast. All right, everybody, welcome to episode 40 of the Honesty Pill podcast. As always, we're here to help you with all things music and productivity, whether it's getting better at your practice, your performance, your auditions, or maybe just helping you become a happy, productive human being. As I always say, I'm always working on that. I've got a transformative thinker as our guest today, Cami McLaren, founder of McLaren Coaching, who's going to dig into how people fall into some of these traps of productivity and panic and prioritization in just a sec. But a quick sponsor shout out to the Yamaha Corporation of America. Stay tuned for more on them later. As you know, they help me bring this podcast and these guests to you 100% free of cost. Well, I lied. It's 99.9% free. The way you can say thank you if you like this podcast is just subscribe to the channel. I need to get to 1,000 subscribers in the next month or two. And click like on this video. It really does help bring more people over to what we're doing here at Honesty Mission Control. And thanks so much for everyone for your support. I really do appreciate it. And we are live streaming this episode. So if you're watching on YouTube and Facebook, hello, drop your questions for Cami or me in the chat, and we'll try and get to as many of them as we can. All right, let's get into it. There are so many popular TV shows around the genre and topic we're going to dig into today. The Practice, Suits, Boston Legal, How to Get Away with Murder, and of course, one of my all-time favorite movies, My Cousin Vinny. Of course, we're talking about lawyers. So why are we talking about lawyers on the Honesty Pill podcast? Well, stick around for this conversation, because if you're a person who's trying to achieve huge goals like getting an orchestra job or act like a professional, starting a business, I think it's really important to look outside our own industry to learn techniques and tools from other people who are dealing with the same types of challenges that we are. And my guest today, well, I don't think she has a TV show about lawyers. She is really aware of all this, and we're going to dig into that right now. Welcome to the podcast, Cami McLaren.
Hi, Chris. Thank you for having me here today.
What a riot. We're going to have a ball. And we should just tell people that you and I only recently met through a mutual acquaintance who is a musician. And I want to talk a little bit about how you connected with her, because do you have any musical background yourself?
I have no musical background at all, Chris.
Awesome. How did you meet Casey?
Well, so while I did practice law for a part of my career, I really am a professional coach. And I work a lot with musicians on getting to that next level of, there's so many things, you know it, your audience knows it. There's so many things that that musicians get to take on as they're learning how to, grow a business, make money doing this, whatever their dream is. And so I happen to know a lot of musicians, especially in Sacramento, where I live. And Casey is one of them. We run a coach training program. She went through the program. She was on staff for the program. So Casey is just like an amazing human being and coach for musicians.
That's awesome. And yeah, maybe we were just chatting before we went live here. We've got to get Casey on this podcast at some point. So Casey, if you're watching, watch your inbox. I'm going to be hunting you down. So I think it's interesting what you just said, that you were a lawyer and you now work a lot with musicians as a coach. So bridge that gap a little bit. How does one make the leap from working with lawyers to musicians?
What a great question. Well, okay, so I was a lawyer for 16 years. Um, I worked with lawyers as a lawyer. And then I went through a coach training program because coaching is a very much, as I'm sure people know, it's a very much personal growth industry. And so I wanted to learn what coaches know. I mean, coaches know how to communicate well, they know how to have great relationships. And I wanted to learn that. So I went through this program, but during the program, you get to practice coaching people. And what I learned was how powerful coaching is, how people can get what they want through coaching. And so when I came out of that program and I decided to work as a full-time coach, which is not the reason I went into it, then I started building a niche, I guess you might call it. And it was lawyers. A lot of it was lawyers. However, I met a woman named Allie Goff, whose husband is Tim Stevenson, who is a musician in Sacramento. And through him, he just connected to me to all the musicians. So I coach musicians, I coach lawyers. What an eclectic group of people.
Yeah, but if you think about a group, so you mentioned that when you became a lawyer, you didn't learn a lot of this stuff, right? I mean, that wasn't part
Mm,
of your lawyer training. It's the same with musicians. And people who've listened to this podcast for a while know that I say this over and over. We tend to get very micro focused and single minded in the
mm,
pursuit of perfectionism, and like go in that practice room and practice until it's perfect and don't come out on stage until it is, which is definitely part of the process, although the perfectionism bit is absolutely misguided. But yeah, single-mindedness is probably really good if you're going to be great at a sport or a craft or whatever. Oh my god, I just used that word that I hate so much, craft. I actually didn't mean it in the terms of like crafting music. I literally meant like craft, like making jewelry. I just had to say that
mm,
because I do I hate it when I see that word. Yeah, what was I saying? I think that it's interesting that you're drawn to musicians because we don't have the training,
mm,
most of us, to do anything other than the thing that we went to conservatory for. And as you mentioned, that's not really sustainable any longer. It's not satisfying, and it isn't really sustainable in a world where I think you need to be more than just good at one thing. What are
mm.
your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, so many thoughts. There is a gentleman, Casey just connected me with this gentleman who has a podcast called The Multi Hyphenate. It's called Dear Multi Hyphenate. And I'd never thought about this before, how small business owners, musicians, he's an actor, coaches, we do so many different things to create so many different streams of revenue, and we serve so many different people because we don't draw a salary, right? And I think the same is true for musicians. You can teach, you can play in an orchestra or a band or a group. You can what else? You can write jingles. There's just so many, and I think this is why it's really useful to have a coach in this industry. Maybe it's only limited by your imagination. Maybe it's only limited by what you tell yourself you can and can't do.
I love that. Let's actually talk about that. What does it mean to be a coach? Like we throw that word around, and in the classical music space, okay, you go to Juilliard, you have a violin teacher, and you have a chamber music coach. What's
Mm,
the difference there? Can you? And I know you're not a musician, but can you speak to the difference in those terms?
yeah. Well, I can give you my thought on it. Um, because I run a coach training program, I know a lot about training coaches, and I have some opinion about use of the word. Um, and the word coach is a broadly used word, and it means lots of different things. And I think it's really useful to check and see what that means to the person using it. For us, a coach is a person who's actually been trained as a coach, who has a skill set of the way that they listen and ask questions and things of that nature. So, on the one hand, if I coach you, and again, you're right, I don't know in music what this might mean, but in any industry, there would be a distinction between coaching in the way that we talk about it, which is, hey, I wonder what you want and why you don't have it and what's getting in the way, and let's dig down and figure out how to move those barriers, those internal barriers. It might be a mindset change, whatever it is, so that you can get where you want to go. On the other hand, if I'm teaching, I am saying, first you do this, and then you do this, and I have a knowledge base of something that I'm trying to tell you. Does that make sense, the difference between those two things?
Totally. Yeah. And I think in musical terms, when I'm listening to what you're saying and framing it to the chamber music and the violin teacher typically, and I'm being very general, will tell you, here's your bow technique, and here's how you do this, and
Yeah.
here's how you do that. Go and do that. Where a chamber music coach will, turn the chair around backwards and sit down and say, what do you guys want to get out of this? And what's the purpose of this group? And I I don't know if that distinction is talked about in school. And I do talk about people's educational process a lot on this podcast because I think that the result and where people end up is not always what the promise is when they enter. And this
Mm.
type of conversation about what is it you want to get out of this experience is something that a lot of people don't think about till, I don't want to say it's too late, but it's later than it ought to be considering the cost of time and money you put into your education.
Yeah.
So I think that's great. One huge aspect of coaching. First of all, I want to say if you're listening to this podcast right now and you're wondering why we're talking to a lawyer specialist about coaching musicians, here's what I'll say to you: great athletes, great actors, writers, whatever, they have people who help them. And I think if there was a
Mm.
title of this podcast today, it would be "Why and How to Ask for Help." And
Mm.
when you should ask for help. And I think that's an important piece that a lot of us don't lean into until we realize we're suffering. What do you think about that,
Yeah.
Cami?
It's a good title, Chris. And I want to say one more thing about coaching. That it originally comes from, I think, sports coaching. And it's not just what do you want to get out of it, it's I'm standing over here watching you do your thing, and I can offer you feedback on how you're doing it. Like maybe you're standing this way or you're turning this way. I'm guessing that with musician coaches, it's a very similar thing. Like, and with any kind of coach, I believe there's a big piece of like, I notice you're doing this because that then helps us adjust so we can get closer to having the things that we want. That's coaching. The asking for help, I agree. Yes,
All right,
people don't in our culture, especially. We're very like, I got it. I'm all take care of it on myself. I'm never gonna ask anybody for anything. Like,
fake it till you make it kind of thing.
yeah, all alone. Like all alone. I mean, for the longest time, as a business owner, as a coach, I just did everything by myself. And when I realized I could talk to people and brainstorm, like my whole life changed. I mean, it just made everything so much easier.
Let's talk about some tools because this is kind
Yeah.
of why I wanted to talk to you here is I want to suggest to
Mm.
musicians or just people who are trying to become more productive and happier and balanced that maybe it's okay to look outside your own industry to find experiences and tools and perspectives that aren't available to you in your lane. What are some of the tools that you bring to the table in this kind of coaching environment? And one I'd love to start with, if you don't mind, is accountability. What's your definition of
Mm.
accountability? How is this related to the words that we choose in our endeavors?
Yeah. Oh, what a great question. I could probably talk about that for a long time. The way that we define accountability is specifically accounting for your actions and the results that you create, which means taking ownership of if the premise of coaching is what do I want, then the best way to get that is to say, why don't I have it? And look at something other than what's outside of yourself. So if I take a really simple example that doesn't have to do with any profession, I talk a lot about, being on time to things, right? People have greater or lesser challenges around being on time for things. And when you're late, what do you say? Do you say, let me look and see what I've been doing and what's getting in the way of me being on time? Or do you say, the traffic was really terrible? Or my kids did X, Y, and Z? And this is the distinction of accountability. And you speak of language also, which is to say, if I say the traffic is at fault for me being late, then what I'm saying is when the traffic behaves, I will be on time. And you cannot count on me unless the traffic behaves. If I say, let me figure out what I've done because you're really important to me and I want to be on time, then I'm going to look for a solution and I'm going to change my behavior. And so the language distinction, I think, between accountable and non accountable is this: accountable says, how can I change things? What am I not noticing? It's all these broad, like open-ended coaching questions, really. What could I learn here? Who do I want to be here? The opposite of accountability is a disempowered way of speaking, which is who's at fault? Who can I blame? What went wrong? And things like I can't, I never, this is so hard, right? Like those are all like sort of disempowered ways of talking. And even if you change the way you talk, Chris, even if you just start asking the questions, you will point yourself in an accountable direction. Just saying, what do I want is an accountable question, because then you're saying, like, I'm going to set myself up and I'm going to go. It's kind of like, where do you point your brain, right? You say, what do I want? How do I get it? You point your brain toward the solution. If you say, this is so hard, this will never work, I mean, your brain is listening, right? And it will shut right off when you say, it's not going to work. Your brain goes, oh, don't look for any answers today, right? If you say to your brain, like, I haven't figured it out, but I'm really wondering how to figure it out, then your brain goes, ooh, I'm on it. Let me go see what I can figure out for you today.
I love that, where you point your brain. That's a great way to think of it.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever read the book Golf is Not a Game of Perfect by Bob Rotella?
Mm-mm.
It's
Mm-mm.
so you mentioned earlier about coaching kind of originated in sports, and there's
Mm.
half the books behind me are sports related approaches to this. And Bob Rotella wrote this book called Golf is Not a Game of Perfect. And one of the things that he talks about is how our choice of words is so important in terms of where that brain gets pointed, especially on a sort of subconscious level. Oh my God, we're getting into it here, Cami. And he'll say something like, if you're on the golf course and there's a water trap, if you say, whatever you do, Cami, don't hit the ball in the water, your subconscious mind can only process whatever you do, Cami, hit the ball in the water. And you have to learn how to point your brain literally to, let's aim for the trees to the right of the pin. And that gives your brain a different target. And you might still hit the ball in the water, but at least you've set an intention and a positive mental alignment to what it is that you want.
Yeah, exactly. That's when people come to coaching, we ask them to tell us what they want. So in 3 months, we work in 3 month uh, time periods, usually. I mean, our coaches, not all coaches. What do you want at the end of 3 months? And often what people say is what they don't want, right? I don't want to be so stressed. I don't want to be so overwhelmed. I don't want to be in debt, right? And that's fine. Like there's no criticism around that. And then what we say to them is, okay, if you didn't have that, what would you have? What do you actually want to point yourself toward? And just that, Chris, just that will get you so much closer to the goal. Just being able to actually see and articulate what you want. Like you said, if I say I want to go toward the trees, I am already closer to the trees than I was when I said I want to not go in the lake. Because your brain doesn't really hear not. Your brain hears go in the lake.
That's amazing. I sometimes have conversations with people when they're getting to know me, and I say, if you had a magic wand, in fact, I'm going to give you a magic wand and a crystal ball, and you can
Mm.
wave that wand and just create the most beautiful, aligned, idyllic situation for you. No limitations, no reality checks here. We're talking straight up Harry Potter. What does that look like for you?
Mm.
And often within the first 5 seconds of the answer, they have found their way back to, well, because I hate it when this happens and I'm always falling victim to this and the wait, it's too hard. And I'm like, whoa, whoa, whoa. I literally gave you a magic wand and
Yeah.
you went right to negative fantasy land.
Mm-hmm.
Let's
Mm-hmm.
spend some time over here in positive fantasy land. I think
Yeah.
it's a habit that we have to build.
Yeah. I think it's true. And I actually think there's one of the things I love is the study of neurology, like how your brain works. And I think that because what you said was the thing about don't hit the ball in the water, that is a how your brain works situation. And I think that I read somewhere that our brains are more oriented toward the negative than they are toward the positive, in the sense of we look for problems, right? We don't look at what's right. So if every day you want to make sure that your dog doesn't bark at the door, and every day you're like, oh my God, the dog is barking at the door. I've got to train the dog not to bark at the door. So now I'm working on that. I'm working on that, working on that. And every day I'm like, this is how many times the dog barked at the door. When the dog stops barking at the door, there's every chance that you don't even notice that. There's every chance that you're like, oh, normal baseline, right? Like there's so many things in our lives that we look at that we say that is a problem, and we focus and we focus and we focus, and then it goes away, and we don't say every day for the rest of our lives, thank God the dog doesn't bark at the door, right? It's just normal. And so you can apply this a lot of places, right? Because children, people say it a lot about children, but I do a lot of work with leaders in the organization. And if your brain is oriented to problems, the thing that's challenging about that is now what your employees hear is fix this, get better at this. We'd like to, even if they're nice, wonderful bosses, right? Like we really want you to excel in this area. What they don't ever say is, here are all the things you're doing that we love. Like specifically, not just good job, but specifically you do all these things really well. Or they often don't even say, like, that thing we asked you to fix, like you totally fixed that. You're doing so great with that. So on this side, we have your brain looks for problems. Okay. On this side, we have what motivates you is people telling you what you've done right. And so there's this conflict between those two things. Like the way we speak to people or ourselves is in problem orientation. And this is true like inside your own brain, right? Like you also look for problems in yourself and rarely tell yourself how great you're doing. And it sets up this like it's hard to move forward from that place because it's such a negative mindset, but I think it's really really natural. I think that's literally how our brains are wired, and we have to teach ourselves not to do that.
Do you think we're born that way? Are we? I mean, are we wired that way, or are we wired with a growth mindset and optimistic worldview, and then it gets changed? I mean, that's a
Yeah.
question. Maybe is bigger than a podcast, but what? I mean, what do you think?
Um, I think it's possible that we're born with growth mindset. I don't know. I think there's every chance that I think we get enculturated into whatever culture we live in, right? Like we live in a negative culture in this country, is my experience of it, right? I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying we look toward what we need to fix all the time. And I think the only reason I think it's possible that we're born that way is that I think it goes back to, like, how your brain, like the reptilian brain, and there's a lot of studies on how the brain has developed through centuries, right? And that back when it was like caveman days, you had to look out for the lion, saber-tooth tiger, and so your brain was on like high alert all the time. This is the reptilian brain, right? So like it's the brain, the lizard brain they call it, that's always looking for like what's going to kill me. And now today we have that brain, and what's weird about it is we see like, oh, I'm about to be late on this project as like death, like everything's going to fall apart. I'm going to be homeless and bankrupt. And that's it, right? It was a brain we needed, you know, back with the saber-toothed tigers that we still have. And now we see everything as like life or death. I heard you laugh.
Yeah, I was just laughing because I definitely am still really in touch with my lizard brain. In that,
Mm.
occasionally I will. I don't know if it's what's the word? It's like overdoing the possible things that could go wrong. And the
Yeah.
joke in my family is, and it's kind of a morbid joke, but it's what they say. I'll be going like, well, and then this, and then that, and then this, and my wife will say, yeah, and then everyone will die, right? And I'm like,
Yeah.
well,
It's that.
no, yeah, like I definitely jump to that very often. I want to back up to something you said about being on time, because I know that's
Yeah.
something that all the musicians that heard that will perk up. And whose fault it is and the language you choose and how much I care about being on time. So here's my question.
Mm.
If you have a rehearsal that starts at 10 o'clock or a meeting or a trial or whatever it is, and you know it takes you 45 minutes to get to work on a terrible day and 20 minutes to get there on a great day, how
Hmm.
much time do you leave so that you can be stress-free? All right, insert that number here. And you've tested it. You know that if you leave an hour early, walk out the door at 9 a.m., there's no way within reasonable circumstances that you're not going to make it by 10. The problem is I see, and I have been guilty of, still stressing out about walking out the door at 9 o'clock as if I was
Mm.
leaving at 9:40. In other words,
Mm.
the trigger and the habit to catastrophize about the commute or whatever it is, the project, is so under the surface for so many of us that I think it can be almost defeatist to even built in good systems and awareness around trying to get out the door on time if we're not aware of the fact that we get stressed about it. Does that make sense? 'Cause I'm sure you've seen this in your coaching.
Yeah. It does, and I don't think that that particular thing is true for like all people, but I think the thing you're talking about is um, we get addicted to certain mindsets, and if the mindset you're hooked on that your brain is repetitively doing is stress about leaving, then leaving earlier doesn't help with that because your brain is still wired to do that. There's a great movie called What the Bleep Do We Know About Anything? And it's about quantum physics. And there's a gentleman named Joe Dispenza who talks about addictive mindset. And what he says is that if you are addicted to, say, worrying about leaving on time, what that addiction is it's a brain pattern, right? Like, okay, I'm worried about being on time. But what happens when you're worried? Cortisol. So you get a chemical response. Maybe you like it, maybe you don't, but your body is attached to it. And so that's the nature of addiction. I'm not talking about substances. I'm talking about addictive thought patterns is that they create an actual experience in your body through chemicals. And then it is like addiction, right? Like if you stop, if you say, I'm not going to worry about being late anymore, that's not because you're like, that doesn't come from leaving earlier. It comes from breaking the addictive cycle that has you attached to the feeling of being worried. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. And I think you're right. I've read some Joe Dispenza. I've got Being Supernatural on my shelf back there. It's a heavy duty stuff to get through.
Mm.
But I do love him. Yeah, I think we do get addicted to those patterns, and this is like that question: Are we wired this way? Are we born this way, or is it something that just comes about with the environments we live in? And if you're a person who is, as I said in the introduction, trying to get an orchestra job or do something great, if you have goals, it's really easy to slip into these cognitive behavioral dissonances and make them become normal. You also said a big trigger word for me, which is cortisol, because that's like, performance and being on stage
Mm.
and the moment, and it's like it's fun. It's like
Mm-hmm,
thrills.
mm-hmm.
That's why I like trail running. I think it's just there's a thrill element to it, but it can be dangerous if you don't keep it under control.
Yes, I have read that. Yeah, it's good for that. It's not good to have in your body all the time. And if we run around all day long saying, "Am I going to be late for Chris's podcast? Am I going to be late to like this date? Am I going to be late to this dinner? Am I going to be late to this artificial deadline I made in my mind?" Then we have cortisol in our body all the time, and that is really not good for us.
Well, frankly, everything is made up anyway. Like you used the example of being on time to a podcast interview with me. We made it up. Like we made this up. We could start it at 3 or 3:40. It really doesn't matter. And whether or not that's something worth getting stressed out is another conversation. All right, you mentioned running around all day. Let's talk about a topic that is cross industry, cross
Mm,
human, doesn't matter what your discipline is, to-do lists.
mm,
I have been through so many iterations of productivity and to-do listism, uh, and I
mm.
think I've dialed it in the way I deal with it right now. But I'm curious about some of your insights through the work you've done and your own personal development. How do we approach to-do lists in a way that's impactful, not
Mm,
stressful? Could I even say joyful?
mm. Okay, Chris. So I'm gonna first say one size probably does not fit all. And one of the things that I talk about when I do time management trainings is I could tell you to get up at 5 a.m., write a list, set an intention, then drink coffee. Like I could tell you how to do it the way I do it. But not everybody's the same. So that's back when we talked about the distinction between teaching and coaching. Coaching question is like what works best for you. With that caveat, I'll say a few things about to-do lists. Back to the neurology of the brain. When people feel overwhelmed, it's usually because they have too much in their brain. And again, your brain is really going to do what you tell it to do. So we walk around all day long, and I, I have informally surveyed people, and I think that this is universal. We hold stuff in our brain. We just hold stuff in our brain. I got to be there at this time. I got to remember to get the milk. I got to call my mom. And now we've got 7,000 things that our brain is holding. So if you tell your brain to hold things, it will do that. Unfortunately, it will bring them back at some very strange and inconvenient times, like when you're trying to sleep, when you're meditating. Those are the most common times, I think, when you're like, now I'm not going to think about anything. Oh, that's right, I didn't call my mom. And so, what is cool about the to do list is one of the most powerful things you can do to avoid overwhelm, not even just for productivity, but to not be stressed, is to write things down. Because that's the other thing about your brain. If you write down, call my mom, get the milk, whatever else I just said, you'll have it on the list. Your brain will let go because here it is. It's on the list. So I think there's a variety of ways to deal with it. It depends in part too if you like to use a calendar for the purpose of scheduling your time. Some people do, and so you can use them in conjunction. I think it's useful to have a master list, like everything that needs to come out of my brain so I can focus. And then it's useful to have a daily list. And then another like psychological hack is only put the amount of things on your daily list that you can actually do. Because if you put, 10 things on your list and you do 3 things, then you feel like defeated and your energy drops and all of that at the end of the day. If you put 3 things on your list and you get 3 things done at the end of the day, you're like, woohoo, like I can celebrate now. Same 3 things. And so I think that when I talk about time management, I often call it energy management because I think time just does what time does. Question is, where is your energy? Because right, that certain days you can get all this stuff done and certain days you can't based on sleep and all that kind of energy, but also psychic energy, psychological energy, which is like, do I every day tell myself I'm going to do 10 things and do 3, which then makes me not want to go to work the next day. So that's my best with to-do lists.
Energy management. That's worth writing down. That was brilliant. I think I've figured that out for myself. I use the Passion Planner, which I have a huge master to-do list brain dump for those late nights where my brain won't stop racing. I can just write whatever I want. There's no categorization. It's just all written down. And then I will take those things and hopefully in a smart way, create a daily to-do list that is reasonable. 3 items is a good list. I love that. And then work that into my realistic schedule with calendar blocking. This sounds crazy that we're talking about this just like being a human being and living, but I think if you don't have some kind of tool or plan for handling this stuff, the spiral hamster wheel of I never get enough done, I'm not enough, it just makes it just kind of ruins you, I think, for having any pleasure in the things that you're doing. So I love it. Let's talk about prioritization though with those lists. What does this mean to eat the frog to you?
Okay. Eat the frog to me, Brian Tracy is a coach that I believe coined this term. Um, so often when you start your day, you have a list of things to do, and often you're avoiding some of them. And our brains, I think, often don't say like, "Oh, you're avoiding the thing because you're scared of the thing." Our brains say like, "Oh, you're really busy. You should do this other thing." So usually my example is I come into work and I go, on my list is call George. And I say, okay, I'm gonna call George, but he probably isn't in yet. And it's really early. He might need to get some coffee first. So I'm gonna call him later today. And then later today comes and I look at it, I'm like, you know what? I can't remember what George does. I'm gonna probably need to research this before I call him. I will certainly call him tomorrow. And so your brain just keeps telling you these excuses and you keep putting it off. Eat the frog means take the thing that is the hardest and scariest for you, the thing that you are to and do it first. Because psychologically avoiding something feels heavy. And it tends to be a message, an internal message that like you can't do something. You are not good at, like, it's got a lot of like yucky concepts attached to it, right? You're not that brave. You're not that smart. You're scared of people. Eat the frog is I just first thing in the morning did a thing that was scary. And then the rest of the day is like downhill, because I gave myself this adrenaline rush and I just did a thing that I'm really proud of. So that's Eat the Frog. And it's funny because I do like a 2-hour time management training. And that's the last thing I tell people. It takes that long to tell the story. And regularly people say, that's the best thing I got out of the training. Like it's life changing. Do the
Well,
scariest thing first.
there's another aspect which is important is that George, in your hypothetical example, might be dying for you to call. He might be pulling his hair out at
Mm,
work, waiting for you to call and offer an invitation to a solution. This goes back to that idea of the glass of water and the man in the desert, where somebody just made it all the way out of the desert and you're standing there with a glass of water, but you don't want to give him the water because you got to get your lighting right for your camera, or maybe that's not the
mm,
right glass for the water, or do you want sparkling or still? He doesn't care what the glass
yeah.
is or if your lighting is good or if you're wearing the right suit. He just wants the information. He wants the water and he wants it now. And if you get
Yeah.
hung up on all those limiting assumptions, imposter syndrome, all the things that we all feel, George is suffering and you're the person who's standing there with the solution, maybe. So I think that's important for people when they're breaking out. You have done clearly a lot of research on time management, and I think like me, I've discovered that there's only so many concepts out there, and then you kind of
Mm,
distill it down to these are the main things. Can we talk about a very common trope that we've all heard, which is work smarter, not harder? What does that
mm,
mean to you? How do you walk people through the experience of taking that apart and applying it in a real way?
yeah. Okay. Um, I was thinking earlier when you were speaking about, we have to have these techniques and strategies to get through a day as a human being. But Einstein talked about a metaphor of the human brain, which is iceberg. And what he said was like 10% of the iceberg is above water and 90% is underwater. And essentially, 90% of what you do all day is unconscious. I mean, that was something you should write down and underline. It's kind of shocking and remarkable that 90% of what we do is unconscious. So, what I always say to people in time management training is you learned how to manage your time, how to do things, how to structure your day unconsciously. You watched people, you imitated people. And so, work smarter is actually the same as I could say do all the things smarter, because what it means is be conscious about what you're doing. And this is the premise of coaching. All the questions asked are to get under the waterline into like, what are you doing unconsciously? And so to work smarter is to say, um, I'm going to actually look at what I'm doing and I'm going to make the choices that serve me in the long run or serve me today. It is to be intentional, which means like in this context, thoughtful and purposeful, which in this context means why am I doing this? And so it's less about strategies, it's less about a calendar and a to-do list. And it's more about, I mean, why do I teach time management? I'm a coach. I'm really not a teacher because I think that it's coaching principles that apply. Look at, we talked about what do you want? What do you want at the end of this day? I do this every day. I write down what are the outcomes I want for the end of this day. And um, the I love that you said that the tools are redundant. Like there are just so many, and I think you can sum it up with Stephen Covey. And Stephen Covey wrote the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And his first habit is begin with the end in mind. And that is like, what do you want at the end? And so then he wrote a time management book called Putting First Things First. And it really does have to do with, are you just running as fast as you can because you're scared and you're addicted to being scared and you're addicted to this urgency? He talks a lot about addiction to urgency. If you're in an urgent mindset, that is an unconscious space. Very few people say, oh my God, I'm in a hurry. I've got to get this thing done. Let me run as fast as I can and, not think about what I'm doing, right? Like that's not a conscious decision. Conscious decision is let me stop. Let me say, where do I need to get with this project? When do I need to be there? Okay, how should I approach it? That 2 minutes makes your next hour much more productive than if you just jump in as fast as you can. And so that is work smarter. And the harder is really just, it's a very old unconscious strategy that people employ, especially lawyers, that says just work later at night. Just multitask. Just, while I'm on the phone with Chris, I'm going to also be writing this thing and doing this thing, right? Like, and also I'm going to be looking at my emails and I'm going to be doing all the things at the same time. That's the harder part of the equation.
I'm glad you just said the word multitasking because I was going to ask you about that next.
Yeah. Mhm.
Um, Being present, focusing on one thing deeply, what does that mean to you? Because I think that I wonder if we're coming into a level of more awareness as productive people now than we have been. That the I'm busy and I'm doing 500 things at once used to be a badge of honor. I don't think it is anymore. I think the new goal to strive for is slowing down everything. What are your thoughts about that ability to be present on one thing at a time?
Yeah. See, and that's why time management is not about the tools. It's about this kind of thing, this mindset kind of thing. I think that our brains are really only made to do one thing well at a time. I think that multitasking is a fiction in the sense that yes, I could probably do more than one thing at a time. I could certainly hold my phone like this and talk on it while typing on the computer. But what is my brain doing? So it's kind of like the alt tab on the computer, how you can flip back and forth, you can toggle back and forth between screens. And the research seems to indicate that it takes like 5 to 7 seconds to switch between screens in your brain. So what happens? I'm talking to the person, I'm on my email, I'm writing something down, I'm doing three different things at the same time. And I'm faking myself into thinking like I'm doing a bunch of stuff right now, except I'm not. I'm doing them. I'm not focused on them. My brain is here. Then it comes here and it goes, what was happening? And then it goes here and then it goes like I often think about how if I'm reading an email while the phone is ringing, often a person will answer and I will go, who was I calling? I can't even remember who just picked up the phone because my brain already has left, and it takes a while for it to come back. So I think multitasking is another thing. I always poll audiences when I do time management trainings. How many of you think that multitasking is a real thing that works? A few people do, and that's fine. Like I'm not here to change your mind about that. Most people don't believe it works. And then I say to them, how many of you do it? And it's everybody because it's an unconscious stress response to urgency and overwhelm. It's an unconscious response where we just go as fast as we can and do as many things as we can. And if we stop and we consider the best thing to do, then probably one thing. The other thing I'll say about presence, Chris, is that, um, man, our brains are so strong and so smart and so good at doing one thing. Like humans are very smart. Our brains are not meant to try to do more than one thing at a time. And that's the problem. And so the thing about presence is that your time management will get better because actually you won't make as many mistakes and you won't mess things up in Ray tasks. In Ray relationships, you won't have quite so many people to like clean things up with later. And if you do one thing at a time and you set it up that way, it's a hard habit to get into. Um, you'll make fewer mistakes, and here's the other thing: you will be less stressed. You will feel better. It's like meditation is doing one thing at a time and thinking about one thing at a time. It's kind of a meditative Zen sort of way to approach your work and your relationships is to do them one at a time. I think it's very hard to convince people to do that. I think people like the idea, but it's hard. It's hard for me to not be like, oh, I could also be checking my email real quick.
In terms of mindfulness, there a great book by Thich Nhat Hanh. He talks about mindful eating, and I thought, what the heck
Mm.
is mindful eating? And he was noticing that if you're eating a mouthful of food, and while you're chewing that food, your fork is assembling the next mouthful of food, you're not actually
Mm.
present onto the food that you're eating. And he would posit that your body is actually not going to get as much nutrients out of that food because it's not actually present while you're eating it.
Mm.
Certainly, you won't get the enjoyment or pleasure of eating that food. Uh, that is kind of mind blowing when you think of the culture of multitasking and standing up and eating over the sink is certainly not mindful. Mindful breathing, mindful walking, body scans where you notice if your shoulders are up or your tongue is pressed to the roof of your mouth. I see musicians on the stage all the time in their when they're not playing and their shoulders are way up. And I'm thinking, oh, they're stressed about the thing that's coming and they're not even enjoying the thing that's happening right now.
Yeah, I love that. And That's interesting about the not getting the nutrients out of your food. Like that might be a metaphor for all the things, right?
It could be. I mean, technically, if you're being stressed while you're eating, you probably aren't getting the nutrients out of your food because there's probably some chemical imbalances in your body from the cortisol or what have you. So I don't know, not a doctor, but I think there's probably some truth to that. Speaking of multitasking, I want to hit pause for a quick second and give some love to the sponsor of the Honesty Pill podcast, and that would be the Yamaha Corporation of America. You guys know I talk about Yamaha a lot, and they've been with me pretty much since the beginning of my orchestral career. And talk about mindfulness. They certainly have been amazing as far as connecting with me as an artist and helping me develop my job and just sort of transform the instrument. My goal when I'm playing on the stage of the Los Angeles Philharmonic is not to be thinking about the instrument in my hands, but to just get past that and allow myself to connect with the character or whatever it is I'm trying to connect with the person that's listening to me, which is the point. The reason I'm really dedicated to Yamaha and thrilled that they offered to sponsor this podcast, though, is not the way they treat people who are in major orchestras, but the way they treat music education and their dedication to helping young, especially in underserved communities, have access to professionally designed student instruments and help those people have that experience at every age level that we realize is important with music. For over 6 decades, Yamaha has been really dedicated to music education, and it looks like they're going full steam ahead. So I just want to say here, thank you so much for sponsoring this podcast. It does mean a lot to me. And again, it helps me bring guests like Cami to you, zero cost. So please hit subscribe and like this video right now so I can bring this information to more people. So Cami, I'd love to talk for a second about some real experiences. You said you are working with musicians a lot. What are you notice when you work with this group of people that are some patterns or some things that come up over and over again in those sessions?
Yeah, I think you and I talked about how it's similar, I think, in some ways to the profession of coaching, in the sense that there seems to be a mindset in both professions that you can't make money doing this, which probably goes into like a common mindset in our country that you can't make money at art and that you can't make money doing things that you enjoy doing. And so, obviously, mindset, maybe it's not obvious. I, I think it's obvious. Mindset affects your choices, right? We tend to do, you talked about self limiting assumptions. Self limiting assumptions are important because if you believe you can't do something, then you won't do it. And the whole thing in coaching about getting, so we keep coming back to what do you want? Why don't you have it? Is a comfort zone question. And our comfort zone tends to be made up of what we believe is possible. And in coaching, our idea is to ask you questions so you see more possibility. And one way to see more possibility is to change your mindset. And so with musicians, if you believe you can't make money doing this, and then that keeps you from taking certain chances, a way to change that belief is to take those chances and to see that you are wrong, to see that that is not actually true. There's many ways to change a mindset. That is one of them. So I think that one of the common beliefs is that you can't make money. I hear that all the time, that people don't value it, that which I suppose is related to not making money, but like don't value. It's a what do I want to call it? Like it's a side. I want to say side hustle, but that's not right. It's a side thing, and that kind of entertainment in our world, right? Like it's in our country, and I think that's also a common belief. And you and I were talking earlier about how we have a similarity between you and I that musicians and coaches that we get a lot of emails that say, "Hey, I could help you make money in this practice. I could help you get a lot of clients. I could help you, get a lot of gigs. I could help you like." What's the word? I can't think of the word, but anyway, make it so that you have more of this, right? Okay.
10x.
What is it? What?
But 10x your whatever it
Yes.
is. Yeah.
What is the presumption behind that? The presumption behind that is you're not making money. So it annoys me when I get letters from coaches, maybe they're coaches, or people who are like, because what they say to me, Chris, is we're going to help you make X number of dollars a month. And I'm happy to finally be in a position where I can write back and say, I already make that kind of money. And it annoys me that you're perpetuating this myth by saying, by assuming that I'm not already doing that. And by and large, it's exactly what I see of musicians, at least the ones that I know.
I got one. People say, yeah, but you're in the LA Phil, and that's why XYZ. And this is I think this is the hardest thing for people to
Mm.
wrap their heads around. And it's so hard for somebody to say in a position that I have a job that I think is a decent job. And they say, yeah, but you're in the LA Phil. That's why XYZ. Right. But the reason XYZ, that's how I got into the LA Phil. It happened in the opposite direction. I believed that I could do it, and then I did it. It wasn't that I did it and then I could believe that I could do it. Because I mean, you might be one of that 1% that of people who doesn't believe they can do a thing and it happens anyway. That isn't very common in sports, in being an author, getting to be an actor for real money, or certainly being a professional musician or a coach and running your own business. I think it's the opposite way around. You have to believe and have gratitude for the thing before
Mm.
it happens. For example, with my business clients, I say the first thing you should do is incorporate and become an LLC or an S corp and open a bank account.
Mm.
Why? Well, because if you open a bank account and there's $0 in it, what a beautiful space for you to then serve people and have a great value exchange and fill that bank account up so you can pour that money back into the business and serve even more people. That's a mindset shift. And they're like, but what if it doesn't work? And I'm not sure I'm serious about it. Right. And right there is where the train gets derailed.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's where the coaching is, right? Is I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I have doubt. I think that I want to add to what you just said about like believing that you can do the actual thing. Maybe you don't believe you can do the actual thing, but I do think what's required is you have some level of belief in your yourself, in I don't know what I might call the universe, in something that will drive you forward to do scary stuff that you don't believe you can do, or that you have doubt. I should not say that you don't believe you can do, because I think it's true that we don't do what we don't believe we can do. Absolutely, that our behavior follows our beliefs. And if you believe you absolutely are going to fail, this is kind of a fuzzy space, right? I don't think it's all or nothing. Believe in yourself, don't believe in yourself. I think it's be open to the possibility that you are powerful enough to make this happen. I think that's probably for me the mindset, though I think there are many mindsets that will support you in going forward. One is like, I don't think I believe myself, so let me hire a coach so that I can work on this. um, I think you can tell by watching your actions what you believe in.
I think I've heard a great definition of coaching that said a coach is just someone who helps you figure out and believe what you can already do. But I think I'm botching that, but it was something like they help you do the thing that you can already do. And it has to do
Yeah.
with this belief system that you mentioned. You just
Yeah.
talked about the art of possibility. And I think we
Mm.
talked about this in our pre-chat, that
Yeah.
there's a great book by like someone we both know about called The Art of Possibility by Ben Zander, the conductor of the Boston Philharmonic. Hello, Ben, if you're ever listening to this podcast. I appreciated that Friday afternoon class. What did you get out of that book? And again, I find it so awesome that coming from a space of attorneys that you ended up reading this book, or that you know about
Mm.
this book.
Yeah. Well, coaching. It's because of coaching. Um, well, it's got like 11 tools in it for, again, talk about, I think we're talking about like the multi-hyphenate thing, that there's a lot of crossover, right? Like he's a conductor, but what he says is these tools apply to business, and they really do. But I'm gonna so I learned many things, and in our coach training program we study this book. But the first one I'm going to say, because it goes back to what you said earlier, Chris, is his first tool, I do believe, is called It's All Invented. And the idea is essentially what you said earlier. There's no like objective reality. There is what you bring to reality. There is your interpretation of reality. And I think most people don't appreciate I'm going to call them stories, the stories we make up about things. And if I make up a story that musicians can't make money, then I'm going to have a very hard time getting out of that box. If I make up a different story, like, well, sometimes it's challenging, but they haven't done what I'm doing, that's a different story that makes me feel better, gives me more belief in myself, and is much more likely to have me be able to create the thing I'm after. So I think that's the most important one. Well, they're all important, but It's All Invented it's so powerful. It messes with my head though, because It's All Invented is a crazy concept. But I think again in coaching, we're all about where's the possibility. And that's where the possibility is. When you I think it was Wayne Dyer said, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change.
It's a great quote. I love it.
Yeah.
I actually surprisingly don't own the book from Ben Zander. I'm going to order it after this call because I had his class for a year at NEC in Boston, and I think I got most of those 11 tools. But I should definitely support him with that book. Can we talk a little bit about a word that I love that you used already today, which is game changer? The passion
Mm.
planner that I use, that the tool that I talked about earlier, the way that tool works is it aligns your goals with your passions. And then it distills down through a series of really brilliant exercises one thing that if you did today would have the most
Mm.
positive impact on your life or your
Mm.
goals. And they call it the game changer. Can you talk a little bit about
Mm.
game changer workshops that you do, when they're coming up, who are they for? And I just want to take a quick look at your website while we talk about these.
Yeah. Um, First off, wow, I'm going to buy that planner. Like that sounds fantastic because it takes you from like the why, the big why in your life, down to like most people start with how am I going to do it? But the better place to start is the passion, right? And
Mhm.
down to like what you're going to do. So, okay. As I have mentioned, I run a coach training program. It's a year long. And so I have many, many small bits of that to either deliver that value to people who don't want to do the program or to introduce them to coaching, right? So game changers are an introduction to coaching. And what we do is on every game changer, so last week we had the first one, which was on curiosity and worldview. And we teach this tool that will have you will be able to go out and use right away, right? Like I'm never about sales. I'm always about like what can I give to people. And so it's an hour and a half call, and during the first like hour and 15 minutes we introduce the tool. So as you can see, the next one on April 16th will be about listening, deep and reflective listening. We'll introduce the tool, we'll talk about the tool, and then we have little breakout rooms, we practice the tool, and then the last 15 minutes of the call, we talk about what is the program? What is the coach training program? And throughout the call, we talk about what is coaching, but from the side of the relationship of the coach. What do coaches know? What do coaches want? What is their methodology? What is their reason for doing this work? And what is the distinction between a coach and somebody who's not a coach? So, and obviously, like it gets thrown around perhaps, but it is a game changer. Like what you said, you're the passion planner, that is a game changer. It is a game changer to have a very focused thing to do in the day that has to do with your passion. And I strongly believe, though I am biased, that coaching is an absolute game changer. It is absolutely like I almost everyone I've met have gone through the coach training program or through being coached by a certified coach has said this changed my life. Like it is absolutely a game because you go back to like accountability, right? You go back to owning what you want in your life, and there's just great power in that.
Yeah, I love that word, and you should check out the Passion Planner.
Oh
It's
well.
I've been through all different journals over the years, and I have stacks of them behind me filled out from years, and they're just great roadmaps to what I thought my goals were, how those evolve. But this is great. Are the game changer workshops? What do they cost? Can anyone sign up for
Mm.
them?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm sure you have the my website in your show notes, and it's McLarenCoaching.com. That's the homepage you were just scrolling through. Yeah, you click on that. It's a Zoom call, which means you can live anywhere. It's $35 because really all I'm trying to do is give people an opportunity to understand what this is. So yeah, there's one each month. There
Great.
will there will actually be one on accountability in May. I can't remember what I've chosen for June, So it's a obviously it's a giveaway value. Honestly, it's $35 because I have this theory that people won't show up if you give them things for free.
Yep.
So it's
100%
$35.
agree. 100% agree. I found that people who pay attention, and that goes for trumpet lessons or Zoom calls or anything. And that we could talk about pricing as a coach and a business owner. And by the
Mm,
way, if you're a person who's running a flute studio right now or a music appreciation class or whatever, musicians, please know your worth and know that the price you set is going to attract the level of client or student or school. If you're working at a college that doesn't appreciate you and is undervaluing you and underpaying you and overworking you, that is a decision that you are 100% in control of. This is a big topic for people running businesses, is how to appreciate what your value is. Um, I know that you
yeah.
run into that all the time, Cami.
You said this earlier. You asked me about common. I'm gonna call it drift. We have a word in coaching called drift, which is it's like the way you drift down the river if you're not like paying attention. It's kind of like where you unconsciously go. It's a mindset that does not work for most people, and a common drift in the entrepreneurial music industry, at least, and coaching is uh, because I can't make a lot of money at this. I should not charge people a lot, and when you say know your worth, Chris, like that is so powerful because, sometimes we offer things as coaches and people say to us, I can't afford it. I tried this experiment where I said, like, okay, what would you like to pay me? And then they say, oh, I don't have time, because money is really not the thing that's going to get in the way, right? And there's all the psychology of money. Like I think you're alluding to it with, like, if you are a teacher of music and you charge more, people will value it more. It's the absolute opposite of what our mindset is, isn't it? I
Yeah.
think it's just the opposite. Like, charge more, you will get more clients. I think that's actually the way it works.
I had a trumpet colleague in Dallas who asked me, "How can I get more students?" I said, "Double your rates." He laughed, and of course, that's a that was a bit of a flip comment, but also I don't know what he was charging, but I'm sure it was way less than someone who had his level of expertise and his uh, he was a really impactful teacher, and I know that he wasn't probably charging
Mm.
enough, and he had students who would blow him off all the time. Oh wow, we're getting like super into running a business, but I think this is an interesting conversation because a lot of people who have set out to do a certain thing, you talked about knowing your why earlier and asking yourself, what is it that you want? You might think that you want a big orchestra job or a college teaching position, but when you get right down to it, you might actually want something that is tangential to that or related to that in a way that you don't even see yet. And
Mm.
asking questions like, what is your worth? What do you want? Having conversations like this one that just make you think about it, you might open up some possibilities to a whole life and career and network and people that are surrounding you that you ever even knew. Point in fact, the fact that you and I are even talking right now is hysterical because unless I,
Mm.
crash my car into somebody and they need a lawyer, I don't know if we would have met otherwise.
Well, yeah, I don't practice law, but I coach people, and I think that the way we crossed paths was hysterical. It was Casey Lipka. I
Yep.
mean,
Shout
different.
out to
It's just
Casey
different,
Lipka.
different walks of life, and I do think also the world is getting so much smaller. It's like 2 degrees of Casey Lipka, and I find that with so many people,
Yeah.
just a couple of degrees.
By the way, that's the podcast title, 2 Degrees of Casey Lipka. Go to CaseyLipka.com, by the way, Lipka. You can read Casey's story. She has no idea we're going to talk about her right now. So sorry, Casey. I hope you don't mind.
I love
Um,
it.
Her band, Dear Darling, is fabulous. Hire them to come play
Mm.
at your next event. Okay. I could talk to you all day long, Cami. This is amazing. I want to just share with you last question, which I ask every guest, which is,
Yeah.
was there a time when you hit like a major roadblock or had to face some hard truths, and what happened? How did you deal with it, and how did it sort of impact your journey and impacted where you are today?
Yeah, thank you. So I did practice law for 16 years. I do not practice law now. A lot of people make that mistake. But you have to keep up a lot of requirements to practice law. So I practiced law for 16 years, and I went to this program, as I said, to learn what it meant to be a coach. And through that experience, I got the incredible opportunity of coaching people and seeing the changes they made in their lives. So then I come out and I'm still a lawyer. And so I was back practicing, and it didn't take long. And I was like, I was coaching. Maybe I want to have some clients. Like, I really love doing this. And it really did not take long at all before I realized like that was not my passion at all. And it's funny, people talk about finding their passion. That was never a question I asked in my entire life. Never did I ask, what is my passion? I practiced law because it made sense to me to do that, because I was an English major and, that's the way I saw the world. I think that my passion, found me, and I was smart enough to have the honesty pill conversation with my wife when I got out. And I said, you know what? This is not it. This is no longer it. I do not want to do this. And to her credit, she said, okay, stop. And what a leap to go from practicing law to this brand new service-based industry, which, it takes a while. Any service-based industry takes a while to get going. And it was a leap of passion for me. It really was. And it was a hard pill to swallow, because money, security, safety, passion, this thing that I really love and want to do. Like it reminds me, as I'm talking, of like, I think what it means to be a musician, to like follow the thing that feels best to you and the thing that you love doing. So that was the pill, and it changed my life. Changed my life. Would not go back for a second.
I love all of that. And it's scary, right? Because you're also
Mm.
redefining your entire identity. Hi, I'm Chris, I'm a trumpet player. Hi, I'm Cami, I'm a lawyer. I don't know if you guys have those conversations or did when you were practicing, but we musicians are so guilty of leading with that identity marker. And it sometimes it's because you're at a festival or you just finished a concert, but sometimes it's just out in the public, and it's so part of our identity. And I think it gets reinforced that people say, "Oh, how interesting, you play the trombone for a
Mm.
living." And it is interesting because it's kind of a weird job, to be honest. But I think that it is too ingrained in our personalities. And then if something goes wrong, or maybe you decide that's not what you want to do anymore, it shatters your foundation. So that passion and that courage, I think, is really important that you mentioned.
Yeah, it's interesting what you just said too, because in other countries, we do not lead with, like, when somebody says, "Who are you?" We don't lead with what we do.
Hmm.
In our country, we lead with what we do. And you're right. When you decide to go a different direction, then suddenly, who am I? Or when people retire, they often get into like, who am I?
Yeah, but that's a great place to wrap it up. I would say ask yourself these questions that Cami brought up today. What do you want? Ask
Mm.
questions that open up to that art of possibility, changing that mindset. I could literally talk to you for hours. This has been such a
Mm.
pleasure. Thank you for joining us. And I'm going to put links to the show notes and make sure everyone knows where to find you as well.
Thank you, Chris. I really appreciate being here, and I really appreciate what you're doing for musicians and for everybody.
Thank you. Appreciate it. All right, hang tight. I'm going to say goodbye. Everybody, go check out McLaren Coaching, McLaren. So there's no U in there. I know I spelled it wrong a few times. McLarencoaching.com. And check out some of these amazing things that Cami has coming up. I'm looking, there's so much more on her website we didn't even get into that she represents and stands for: race, foundation, practice. So go check it out. And before I sign off, if you're not already tuned into Peak Performance Mondays, you're missing out on a weekly dose of motivation, laughter, and actionable insights designed to supercharge your personal and professional growth. Head over to honestypill.com and just look up in the navigation for Peak Performance Mondays. You can sign up for free, and I'll hit you up with a new edition every single Monday. And I've got my archive that's building there as well. All right, everybody, that's it for me. I'm out of here. Happy practicing, and I will see you next time.